I found something in the car today, a small, leather-bound tracking device tucked beneath the spare tire, that finally turned our 12-year marriage into a crime scene. It wasn't just the physical evidence, but the realization that every "I love you" for the last year had been a calculated distraction. Now, looking at the life we built, I realized that some foundations aren't destroyed by storms, but by the quiet, persistent rot of 1,000 lies. My name is Elias. At 42, I've spent my life as an architectural draftsman, a man who finds peace in the rigid honesty of blue lines and load-bearing calculations. My world is one of right angles and 1:100 scales. I believe that if a foundation was poured correctly, the structure would stand forever. But as I stood in our garage, the cold concrete floor leaching the heat from my socks, I realized I had been living in a house of cards. The smell of expensive jasmine perfume always signaled a late night at the office. For my wife, Elena. She is 38, a high-stakes corporate attorney with a smile that can settle a multi-million-dollar lawsuit or break a man's heart. For 12 years, that smile was my home. Tonight, as she leaned in to kiss my cheek, the jasmine was there, but it was underscored by something sharp, metallic, and utterly alien, the smell of expensive cigars and rain-drenched wool. "You're late, Elle," I said. My voice sounded thin, like tracing paper. The kitchen clock ticked with a heavy, rhythmic thud that seemed to vibrate through the granite countertop. "The merger, Elias," she sighed, tossing her trench coat over the mahogany chair. It was a $2,000 coat, wet and heavy. "I told you, the legal team is pulling all-nighters. I'm exhausted." She didn't look at me. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window above the sink, smoothing her hair with a trembling hand. I looked at her shoes, stilettos with a thin, red sole. They were dry. It had been pouring in the city for 3 hours, a deluge that had flooded the gutters of our suburban street, yet her shoes were pristine. "I made pasta," I lied. I hadn't eaten. I had spent the evening staring at a dormant phone, watching the minutes turn into hours. "I ate at the office," she replied, already moving toward the stairs. "Don't wake me up when you come to bed. I have a 6 a.m. briefing." I sat in the dark for an hour, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. I reached for her coat to hang it up, and that's when I felt the crinkle of a card in the pocket. It wasn't a business card. It was a valet ticket from the Obsidian, a hotel bar 40 miles in the opposite direction of her office. My heart did a slow, sickening roll. But the real blow came when I went to the garage to retrieve my gym bag from her trunk. Beneath the floor mat, hidden inside the hollowed-out plastic of a roadside emergency kit, was a second phone. A burner. Elias's initial reaction is a classic study in cognitive dissonance. As an architect, his worldview is built on structural integrity. Acknowledging a flaw in his marriage feels like admitting his own foundation is collapsing. Elena's behavior, avoiding eye contact and the tactile shorthand of a long-term marriage, suggests a psychological distancing. She is already decoupling by creating a physical and sensory barrier. Elias's focus on the dry shoes is a micro-observation, where the brain seeks logical inconsistencies to process emotional trauma. The discovery of the burner phone acts as a hard evidence trigger, forcing him out of the stage of suspicion and into a state of active, painful investigation. The next 14 days were a masterclass in performative normalcy. We went through the motions like actors in a long-running play who had grown to hate the script. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., made the coffee, her blend, dark and bitter, and packed a lunch for a 10-year-old daughter, Maya. I watched Elena across the breakfast island. She was beautiful in the morning light, her skin glowing, her movements efficient. But I was looking for the glitch. That's what I called it. It was the way her jaw tightened when a notification hit her real phone. It was the way she took her tea into the bathroom and locked the door, the muffled sound of a vibrating device buzzing against the porcelain of the sink. "Is Maya still struggling with fractions?" Elena asked one Tuesday, her voice casual, practiced. "She's getting there," I replied, watching her fingers. They were restless, tapping a rhythmic chord against her thigh. "She misses you at dinner, though," Elena's eyes flicked to me, a sharp, defensive flash. I'm doing this for us, Elias. For the tuition. For the house. The house. This house we built in Oak Creek. Every molding, every light fixture was a choice we made together. Now, the walls felt like they were closing in. I started tracking the dead zones, the gaps in her day that weren't accounted for by billable hours. I began to keep a log in a hidden CD file on my workstation, labeled Project Shadow. I noticed her. New rituals. She started taking the long way home, claiming the construction on the I-95 was unbearable. One night I borrowed her car to get milk, and I felt like a thief in my own life. I checked the odometer. She had driven 42 miles more than the distance to her office and back. I reached under the passenger seat, my fingers grazing the carpet, and found it, a small, silver cufflink. It bore the initials JM. It wasn't mine. I don't own cufflinks with initials. I'm a man of simple buttons and rolled-up sleeves. The silver felt cold, like an ice cube against my palm. The psychological toll was becoming a physical weight. I had trouble breathing in the middle of the night. I would lie awake, listening to her steady, rhythmic breathing, wondering how she could sleep so soundly while her life was a construction of lies. I felt the gaslighting beginning, not from her, but from my own mind. Maybe the cufflink belonged to a client? Maybe the valet ticket was for a work event she forgot to mention. But then I would remember the burner phone. I decided to install a dashcam in her SUV. For insurance. I told her, my voice remarkably steady. There's been a lot of hit and runs in the city lately. She hesitated. For 3 seconds, the air in the kitchen was stagnant. Then she smiled, that professional, settling smile. Good idea, Elias. Better safe than sorry. She had no idea that safe was the last thing I wanted her to be. This stage highlights the erosion of the domestic illusion. Elias expected a partner who shared his reality, but he is discovering a shadow marriage. Elena's panic over the car keys and the slight hesitation regarding the dashcam reveal her perceived safety has been threatened. Psychologically, Elias is moving into hypervigilance, where every ordinary object, a cufflink, an odometer reading, becomes a weapon used against his peace of mind. The gaslighting is now mutual. She lies to hide her tracks, and he lies to hide his knowledge. This creates a pressure cooker environment where the emotional connection is replaced by tactical maneuvering. Suspicion is a slow-acting poison. It doesn't kill you all at once, but it numbs your ability to feel anything else. By the 3rd week of my investigation, the house in Oak Creek felt less like a home and more like a surveillance nest. Every floorboard that creaked under Elena's feet sounded like a coded message. Every time she laughed at a text, I felt the phantom vibration of that burner phone in my own pocket. I began to notice that the betrayal had layers. It wasn't just Elena. One Friday, I invited my best friend, Mark, over for a drink. We had been friends since college. He was the best man at our wedding. But as we sat on the deck, the charcoal grill cooling beside us, Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept staring at the ice in his glass, swirling it with a nervous, frantic energy. Elena's been working late a lot, I said, testing the air. She says the merger is a beast. Mark's hand froze. Yeah, mergers. They're tough, Elias. You know how it is. Do I? I leaned forward, the smell of burnt cedar hanging between us. Because Sarah told me she hasn't seen Elena in weeks. But Elena says they had lunch yesterday. Someone is lying, Mark. Mark took a long, shaky breath. Elias, some things, some truths are like load-bearing walls. If you pull them down, the whole roof comes in on you. Just leave it alone. For Maya's sake. That was the moment the floor gave way. Mark knew. My best friend was an accomplice to the silence. My isolation was now complete. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting against a conspiracy of people I loved. That night, after everyone was asleep, I took the dashcam's SD card to my office. I plugged it in, the blue light of the monitor washing over my face. I watched hours of gray highway and monotonous traffic. Then, the audio picked up a Bluetooth call. "He's still playing the part of the doting husband, Julian." Elena's voice came through, cold and mocking. "He's so obsessed with his blueprints he hasn't even noticed the withdrawals. We're at 60%. By the time he realizes the foundation is gone, we'll be in Zurich." Julian. Julian Moore. I remembered the name from a decade ago, a high-flying investment broker Elena had defended in a fraud case. I opened our joint investment portal with trembling fingers. The balance said $412,000. But when I looked deeper into the transaction history, hidden 3 layers deep in pending transfers, I saw the truth. The money was being bled out, $5,000 at a time, into an offshore shell company called Azure Holdings. The betrayal wasn't just a physical one, it was a total, calculated liquidation of our daughter's future. The involvement of Mark adds a secondary layer of social betrayal, which is often more psychologically damaging than the affair itself. Mark's silence of protection is a classic example of bystander guilt. Elena's dialogue reveals a predatory psychology. She views Elias's professional focus as a weakness to be exploited, showing a total lack of empathy. The shift from infidelity to financial embezzlement changes the husband's role from a grieving spouse to a victim of a crime. Psychologically, Elias is now in survival mode, where the emotional pain is being bypassed by a primal need to protect his assets and his child. The following Saturday, Elena announced she was going to a wellness spa for the weekend to deal with the stress of the merger. I watched her pack. She didn't pack yoga pants or comfortable robes. She packed a black silk dress that cost more than my first car and a set of emerald earrings I had never seen before. "Have a restful time, Elle," I said, my voice a hollow echo. I kissed her cheek. It felt like kissing a tombstone. As soon as her SUV left the driveway, I followed the GPS tracker I had hidden in the spare tire well. I didn't take my car. I'd borrowed a nondescript gray sedan from a rental agency. I followed her 3 hours north to a seaside town called Fairhaven. The air was thick with fog and the smell of salt and rotting kelp. She pulled up to a boutique rental cottage overlooking the Atlantic. A man stepped out to meet her. Julian Moore. He looked exactly as he did in the news clippings, sharp, arrogant, wearing a wool coat that smelled of the same cigars I had detected weeks ago. I watched through a pair of high-powered binoculars from a distance. I saw him hand her a thick yellow envelope. Elena gripped it, her face contorting. She started to sob, shaking her head violently. Julian grabbed her by the shoulders, his expression dark and commanding. A red herring. My heart leaped. Is he blackmailing her? Is that why she's taking the money? To pay him off? For a fleeting, desperate moment, I wanted her to be a victim. I wanted there to be a reason I could forgive. I crept closer, moving through the tall beach grass, the sound of the crashing waves masking my footsteps. I reached the window of the cottage. The yellow envelope was sitting on the coffee table, spilled open. It wasn't blackmail. It was 2 new passports, one for Elena, and one for a child named Maya Moore. And there were 2 one-way tickets to Zurich, dated for the following Tuesday. The sobbing I had seen wasn't fear. It was relief. Elena wasn't being forced, she was the architect of the escape. She was planning to take my daughter and disappear. The sensory details of that moment are burned into my mind, the cold glass of the window against my forehead, the rhythmic thrum of the ocean, and the sight of my wife laughing as Julian poured 2 glasses of vintage wine to celebrate my erasure. I pulled out my phone and recorded everything. The laughter, the tickets, the betrayal. The red herring of the yellow envelope illustrates the human brain's confirmation bias. Elias wanted to see a victim, so his mind invented a blackmail scenario. However, the effect of seeing the passports is a total psychological break. The inclusion of the daughter's name on a forged passport shifts the stakes from divorce to kidnapping/abduction prevention. This is the point where the husband's internal narrative switches from grief to justice. The contrast between the cold, harsh environment outside and the warm, celebratory atmosphere inside the cottage emphasizes Elias's status as an outcast in his own life. The ride home from Fairhaven was the longest 3 hours of my life. The rain had returned, a relentless gray sheet that blurred the world outside, but inside my mind, everything was sharp, cold, and crystalline. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a strategist. As a draftsman, I knew that if you want to demolish a building without damaging the surrounding structures, you don't use a wrecking ball, you use precision explosives at the load-bearing points. Monday was a day of silent preparation. I didn't go to the office. I spent 8 hours in my study, the door locked, the blue light of 3 monitors reflecting in my glasses. I called my lawyer, a man who specialized in high-asset divorces and international custody. I called a contact at the firm's forensic accounting department. By 4 p.m., I had a digital kill switch ready. When Elena walked through the door at 6:30 p.m., she looked radiant. She had that post-spa glow, her hair perfectly coiffed, carrying a bag of expensive organic groceries. "The retreat was exactly what I needed, Elias," she said, her voice melodic and light. She walked over to kiss me. I didn't flinch. I let her lips touch my cheek, the kiss of Judas. "I feel like I can finally handle this merger." "I'm glad," I said, my voice steady enough to floor a skyscraper. "Because you're going to need all your strength for what happens next." I was sitting at the dining table. I hadn't set out dinner. Instead, I had laid out 3 items: the silver cufflink with the initials JM, the valet ticket from the Obsidian, and my laptop turned toward her chair. Elena's smile didn't fade all at once. It curdled. She looked at the cufflink, then at me. "Elias? What is this? If you're upset about me losing a client..." "Sit down, Elena," I said. It wasn't a request. It was the tone of a man who had already won. She sat, her movements stiff. I hit play on the laptop. The footage from the beach cottage filled the room. The sound of her laughter, that mocking, sharp laugh about me being obsessed with blueprints, cut through the silence of our home like a saw-through wood. I watched her face turn from confusion to a pale, sickly gray. "The passports were a nice touch," I said, sliding a printout of the Azure Holdings bank statements across the table. "My amor. That's the name you chose for our daughter? You didn't just want to leave me, Elena. You wanted to erase me from her DNA." For a moment there was silence. Then the mask shattered. Elena didn't cry. She didn't beg. She grew cold. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned back, crossing her arms. "You were always so small, Elias," she hissed, the venom finally flowing. "So predictable. Every day the same routine, the same structural integrity lectures. I was suffocating in this perfect life you built. Julian sees me. He sees the woman who deserves more than a suburban cage. This cage was built on my sweat and your lies," I replied. "And Julian doesn't see you, Elena. He sees the $240,000 you've already moved into his accounts. Did you think a fraudster like him would actually take you to Zurich once the money was clear? We love each other," she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "Then you can love each other through glass," I said. I picked up my phone and dialed a preset number. "Officer? You can come in now." The front door opened. 2 plainclothes detectives and my lawyer stepped into the foyer. I had filed charges for grand larceny and embezzlement of joint marital funds, a felony in our state. Because she had already obtained a forged passport for a minor with intent to flee the country, the stakes were no longer civil. They were criminal. As they led her out in handcuffs, she looked back at me. There was no love left, only a raw, jagged hatred. I stood there, the architect of her downfall, and felt nothing. Just the cold, hollow piece of a building that had finally been cleared of its rot. This is the structural collapse of the marriage. Psychologically, Elena's transition from wife to predator is completed when she calls their life a cage. This is her psychological defense mechanism, the moral decoupling, necessary to justify her crimes. Elias's response is a masterpiece of cognitive control. Instead of an emotional outburst, which she could have used against him, he uses institutional power. The point of no return wasn't the affair, it was the moment she attempted to forge a new identity for their daughter. The confrontation serves as a psychological exorcism, where the truth is finally louder than the lie. The months that followed were a blur of legal filings and quiet evenings with Maya. The divorce was finalized in record time. Elena's criminal charges gave her zero leverage. Julian Moore vanished before the police could reach the Fairhaven cottage. He had taken the first $100,000 she transferred and fled, leaving her to face the consequences alone. It was the ultimate irony. She destroyed a man who would have died for a man who wouldn't even answer her collect calls from jail. I stayed in the house in Oak Creek. People asked me why I didn't sell it. Too many memories, they said. But I didn't see it that way. I stripped the wallpaper she chose. I replaced the mahogany furniture. I opened the windows and let the smell of jasmine be replaced by the scent of fresh pine and Maya's paints. I realized that a house isn't just wood and stone. It's an agreement. And when that agreement is broken, the structure changes. One evening, a year later, I was in the garage cleaning out the last of the storage bins. I found a small, dusty blueprint of our house, the original one I drew before we broke ground. I looked at the lines, so straight and hopeful. I didn't feel the burning rage anymore. I felt a quiet, sturdy resilience. Trust is like a pane of glass. Once it's shattered, you can try to glue the pieces back together, but the cracks will always distort the view. The only way to see clearly again is to replace the glass entirely. I sat on the back deck that I had finally finished, the one Elena said we didn't have the budget for, while she was secretly funding her escape. I watched Maya playing in the yard, her laughter authentic and free. I wasn't just an architect's husband or a betrayed man. I was a father. I was a survivor. I was Elias. Nearly 30% of marriages face situations like this, and I was one of them. But I learned that the end of a story isn't the end of the book. It's just the start of a chapter where you finally get to be the lead character in your own life. The chapter was over, but life moved on quietly. And for the first time in 12 years, I knew exactly where I stood. The foundation was level. The air was clear. I was home. The story of Elias and Elena is a profound exploration of betrayal, justice, and self-reconstruction. We watched as a man of logic and structure was forced to navigate the chaotic, irrational world of deep deception. The arc concludes not with a happy ending, in the traditional sense, but with an authentic ending. Elias's growth is found in his ability to reclaim his professional identity, the builder, to fix his personal tragedy. The analysis of the finale highlights the price of deception. Elena ended up alone, betrayed by the very man she chose over her family. The final reflection serves as a universal insight into resilience, that while we cannot control the loyalty of others, we can control the integrity of our own response. The story leaves the audience with a question of empowerment. If your world collapsed tomorrow, would you have the strength to draw a new set of plans?